From The Australian, I'm Claire Harvey. A special bonus episode of The Front for you today. How did Kamala Harris and the Democrats fail so comprehensively? Gender, race and celebrity all played out in ways the Harris campaign didn't expect, and delivered Donald Trump back to the White House. Today, our US reporter Joe Kelly helps me sort rhetoric from reality in the wake of the Democrats' defeat.
Welcome the next president of these United States, Kamala Harris!
Yes, she can. Let me hear you say, yes, she can. Let me hear you say, yes, she can.
No, she couldn't. Kamala Harris couldn't turn around the disastrous campaign begun by Joe Biden. She couldn't convince voters she knew how to ease their grocery prices. She couldn't ease fear and anger about illegal immigration. When she was handed the chalice by a faltering Joe Biden back in July, Harris chose to go for optimism.
I will be a president for all Americans. All Americans. This has not been about a fight that is against something. This is about a fight that is for something. We are not going back. We are not going back.
But it turned out too few Americans were in the mood for her brand of joy. Harris left her dejected supporters waiting on election night and then took until Thursday morning Australian time, more than 12 hours after the confetti settled at Trump's victory party, to concede defeat.
My heart is full today. My heart is full today.
I thought the speech was disappointing from Kamala Harris. I think this was a comprehensive defeat for the Democrats, and I felt she was doubling down on failure.
Joe Kelly is part of our reporting team in the United States.
I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition, and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power. A fundamental principle of American democracy is that when we lose an election, we accept the results. That principle, as much as any other, distinguishes democracy from monarchy or tyranny. And anyone who seeks the public trust must honor it.
There was nothing in there about what the Democrats need to do moving forward or reconnecting with the working or middle class of America. I think that was a mistake. And that key line in the speech was,
I am here to say, while I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign.
well, you just lost. So I think it was problematic, but in some ways I think it's typical of the Democrat mentality out in various states. When I was speaking to people, most of the Republican supporters were voting on issues. They were talking about the economy. They were talking about the price of their groceries. They were talking about the border. Most of the Democratic supporters were talking about Donald Trump's character. So I felt that Trump engaged with these people concerned about their everyday lives, the cost of living. Harris didn't cut through to them. And I think the campaign was exposed for being out of touch. I think it was a mistake. She should have been more accommodating. She should have said that they would have listened to the message, they would have taken heed of the result, and essentially sort of reassessed moving forward. There was none of that. In that regard, I think it was not a politically clever speech from Kamala Harris.
On the campaign, I would often say, when we fight, we win. But here's the thing. Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean we won't win. The important thing is don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. Don't ever stop trying to make the world a better place.
Something that always strikes me about American politicians, candidates for president, Joe, is that they have themselves introduced at rallies. We heard Oprah Winfrey introducing Kamala Harris with this phrase, "Welcome the next president of the United States." Both sides do that. They do that in every election campaign. It's really the opposite of what we hear in Australia, isn't it, where politicians are trying to encourage their supporters to think that their vote matters. You know, you must vote for me, otherwise I might not get elected. In Harris's case, obviously now it's embarrassing to look back and see that she's not the president of the United States. What do you think about that kind of bullish, optimistic sentiment that she invoked at her rallies?
I think it's something that happens on both sides, but I think the problem for Kamala Harris was this sense of elitism that was associated with her campaign. You know, she had this conga line of celebrity endorsements, rock stars, big musicians, Lady Gaga, Beyonce, Bruce Springsteen, Eminem. But at the end of the day, the result shows that it doesn't matter what celebrity endorsements you have. It doesn't matter what A-list celebrities hitching themselves to your wagon. People want to vote on the issues.
And when Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedom nationwide, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law.
One of the issues that Harris lent on heavily was abortion, but she kind of turned that into an identity point, Joe, telling women that they should be fearful of a Trump presidency, that he would enact a national abortion ban, and kind of assuming that women would get that and would vote for her. Educated and young women, of course, in large numbers, did vote for Harris, responding to that rhetoric about abortion. But it seems many other women, particularly in the suburbs, had other priorities like the cost of groceries. So do you think that focus on abortion was misjudged by her, or was it just that she mangled the message?
I think it was too narrow. I think it's fine for them to promote that message on abortion, which is obviously very important to many women and their base, and you need to get the base out. But obviously, women have different views on all sorts of political issues. So I think the campaign lacked depth in its appeal to women, but this was not a problem that was limited to women only. The coalition which she was hoping to cobble together didn't end up materializing at the end of the day. So in terms of Black communities, Latino communities, these communities still, on average, shifted towards Trump. This was a big shock result for Harris, and Kamala Harris didn't do any better than Joe Biden did 4 years before. So you'd have to say her campaign was disappointing in that regard, and that she needed to add more flesh to the bone to really get this broad coalition she wanted over the line, and she didn't. I think you're correct to identify the fact that simply a hollow appeal to identity politics doesn't cut it. There needs to be more substance there.
Kamala Harris spent a lot of time during the campaign talking about Donald Trump's character.
Well, I think this is so rich, coming from someone who has been prosecuted for national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault, and his next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing.
You can see why it was tempting for Kamala Harris, of course, to talk about his character in the hopes that people didn't like all those things about him, didn't like his crude language and the way he spoke about women in particular. But it didn't work for her. So was that a misfire too?
Look, I think this was the great trap when it comes to Donald Trump. This was the trap that the Democrats fell into in 2016. It didn't work. Then it worked with Joe Biden, and it didn't work again now. I think it was so tempting, and it's an easy campaign to run, but it only had a 50% track record. So I think it was a mistake to have so squarely focused so much of the campaign on this relentless character attack. When you go negative, I think you have to accompany that negative campaign with positive offerings, and I don't think that there was enough there. And people also have to believe that the person who is actually going negative has credibility. And I think people felt Donald Trump was a known quantity. He'd been president before. They were familiar with his style. They knew the problematic aspects of his personality, of his character. But at the end of the day, this negative campaign from Kamala Harris also probably shone a spotlight on the fact that people didn't feel they knew too much about her, that she was a bit of an unknown quantity. Her campaign was 107 days. And so in that regard, I think it was a bit of a risk to go down this well-worn route of character assassination against Donald Trump.
Coming up, how do the Democrats start picking better candidates? Kamala Harris was on the ticket for this election campaign from the beginning as Vice President. Then Joe Biden's debate car crash happened.
What I'm going to do is fix the tax system. For example, we have 1,000 trillionaires in America. Billionaires in America.
He stepped down shortly afterwards.
But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition.
So Harris had 107 days to try to defeat Donald Trump. She certainly pulled the polls a lot closer, and maybe she avoided a complete thrashing that Biden would have suffered. But Democrats are now looking back, thinking maybe they should have held a primary process to find a different candidate. So, was Harris the wrong candidate?
I think there are a whole range of mistakes that the Democrats made. There were big, overarching mistakes to smaller mistakes. In terms of Harris herself, she didn't sufficiently differentiate herself from Joe Biden. That was always a problem for her. The campaign was too short. There wasn't enough time for her to explain who she was to people. I think the problem for her was there was no primary process. She didn't have her feet held to the fire, and it was a consistent theme that I picked up from voters on the ground. They felt that what happened was undemocratic and that this undermined a lot of the Democratic attack on Donald Trump as a threat to democracy. They kept saying, well, look at how Kamala Harris was elevated. There was no primary process. This wasn't a democratic thing. People were very concerned about that. And I think also if you do look at the possible contenders, you have Josh Shapiro, Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer. I think it's unlikely if there was a proper primary campaign that Kamala Harris would have ended up running, being the Democratic candidate. I don't think she was the strongest person, but she got the job. I think she was too negative. I think those are the key problems. I think there are broader cultural problems that the Democrats will have to come to terms with. But I think the main problem is people felt overlooked and they felt safer going back to Donald Trump.
Joe Kelly is covering the US election for The Australian. On Friday, we'll be back right here with an episode about Donald Trump 2.0, what we can really expect from his administration, and how much of his wild talk will turn into policy. In the meantime, check out all our journalism and analysis at theaustralian.com.au.